Support for NPR and the following message come from IXL Learning. IXL Learning uses advanced algorithms to give the right help to each kid no matter the age or personality. Get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when you sign up today at IXL.com/NPR.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. This week, we are connecting the dots between hula festivals, climate havens, and 3D scans. I know. How are all of these things connected? Well, we're going to find out with NPR culture correspondent Chloe Veltman and climate solutions reporter Julia Simon. Chloe, Julia, welcome to It's Been a Minute.
Hi, it's lovely to be here.
Thanks for having me.
First off, do you feel safe from climate change where you live?
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, I'm in San Francisco. We are on the coast.
And Brittany, I also live in the Bay Area like Chloe. And I don't think that any of us should think of our geography as the primary thing that will keep us safe with climate change. I think a lot of it's going to be about whether our communities prepare or not.
I mean, I live in New York City, and it has been wild to see how things have changed because of global warming. I mean, I think New York always gets hot in the summer, but just a few years ago, we got reclassified as a humid subtropical climate. And last year, we started getting really bad wildfire smoke and orange skies that I had never experienced before. It's wild to think that within my short adulthood, the city has changed so much due to global warming. And global warming has been top of mind for me lately, with the latest news cycle covering the destruction wrought by hurricanes Helene and Milton in southern states. And it turns out a lot of Americans don't feel protected from the effects of climate change. I mean, according to Pew, 7 in 10 Americans say that they've experienced some kind of extreme weather in the past year. And the weather is only getting more intense. A lot of us have been asking ourselves, if things get worse where we are, where would we go? That's assuming we could go somewhere or that we would want to leave. Well, some people did go to Asheville, North Carolina, because it was a so-called climate haven. And then Asheville got hit hard by Helene. So are climate havens real? And what would it mean to preserve the cultures we live in if they're not? But first, I want to ask, Julia, you spoke to people who moved to Asheville to, quote unquote, escape climate change. What did they say about that?
There are a lot of people who went to Asheville. I actually spoke to one woman who went to Asheville. Her and her husband moved there 4 months ago.
Oh, wow.
And they introduced themselves to some of their neighbors as climate refugees from Austin, Texas, because they had been living in Austin for 30 years.
When dealing with extreme heat?
Summer after summer, getting hotter and hotter. Marianne Roser told me that she just felt like it wasn't sustainable for them in the long term. And they did research and they found that Asheville, according to her research, that it didn't have hurricane risk. That is not accurate.
Yeah.
But I also spoke to another woman, Kelsey Lair. She had been living in California. She's a native Californian. She had been a park ranger at Yosemite National Park. And after being evacuated over and over again because of wildfires, she said that she literally Googled what's the best place to move for climate change. And
Wow.
Asheville was at the top of this list. There were lots of lists you can find on Google that listed Asheville or Southern Appalachia as this place that might be safer. But I think that a lot of Americans are thinking about this and want to find someplace that's safe. And there are a lot of questions we have to ask about that.
Yeah, I want to talk about some of these lists and some of these cities on lists for climate havens. I mean, Asheville was one, but there are also cities like Buffalo, New York, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Duluth, Minnesota, mainly cities in the north, but I've also seen Knoxville, Tennessee, and Charlottesville, Virginia on some of these lists as well. I mean, safe is very relative, but are these cities safe?
Well, okay. Yeah, some of these cities actually, like Buffalo, New York, on their website said they could be a climate change refuge. Cincinnati, Ohio, talked about itself as a climate haven in some of their city literature. Yeah, okay, this question of safe. The reality is that climate change is increasing risks for things like wildfires, hurricanes, sea level rise, drought across the US. Some places are going to be more at risk than others, right? But this idea that there are places that are completely insulated from climate risk, that is where researchers say this is trouble.
So what does it mean if there's nowhere that's quote unquote like actually safe? What does that mean?
I mean, look, there's a reason why we're seeing people with a lot of money building these bunkers underground, right? These luxury bunkers,
Right.
because I'm supposing they're thinking, well, this is a climate haven, right? I build my thing underground with all my amenities, and that's the solution. But I mean, the mass picking up of a group of people and going somewhere else because of this problem, it's not new, but we can expect it to get a lot worse. And I think the thing, Brittany, is that when it comes to climate change, people do not think about the impact of these devastating weather events on cultures, on traditions, on ways of life, right? We tend to think very much about the science that's going on. We think a lot about the devastation to people's homes and businesses. We tend to think about the injuries and the loss of lives. But there's a lot more that gets lost.
To the wealthy people, I just do want to say that I think that even the idea that wealthy people could be insulated from the climate crisis in their bunkers, in the big picture, we all rely on a food system that is at risk because of global warming. Some people who are Googling, I want to move to XYZ place because I'm looking for a climate haven. I mean, that's a privilege to be able to move. Many Americans don't have the money to move. Also, many indigenous communities in the U.S. are connected to their lands. They've been connected to these lands for hundreds, thousands of years. And
Absolutely.
It's not possible to leave.
So regardless of where people live, how do we make sure our cultures stay preserved through climate change? And what will that cost?
I've not actually done any reporting on the dollar expenditure of this sort of thing. With climate change, it's really hard to save buildings, but that doesn't mean that some people aren't trying to do it. I did some reporting about this, about how because of rising water levels in San Francisco, there's a big plan afoot to raise the Ferry Building, which is this old building.
Oh, I mean, that's like an iconic building.
Very famous, not just for tourists, but it's kind of important for commerce. Anyway, they're talking about picking the whole thing up and raising it by a certain amount of feet. But it's really hard to be able to preserve buildings, for example, or hard artifacts, whatever they might be, paintings, books, photographs, old tools. But one thing we can do is we can effectively preserve things digitally. So there are a lot of companies that are working with different cultural organizations to do this work. It's an archiving job. And, making sure that there are beautiful three-dimensional representations in the digital realm of artifacts is one way in which this is being done. And digital representation of something may not be the thing itself, but it is a very powerful memory of the thing. And it also provides a blueprint if you want to rebuild somehow, somewhere. But some aspects of culture they don't require necessarily a lot of money. Rituals and songs and things like that. I mean, we often over-index when we think about cultural heritage and cultures in general. We generally think quite often about tangible things. But, there's a lot to it that's known as intangible heritage. And keeping up with some of these things, whether they're prayers or songs or stories passed through an oral tradition or things like that, I mean, I suppose there's not so much of a dollar cost to that, but certainly you have to keep these things alive.
This question of cost, for many years, people talked about, the costs of adapting to climate change will be so great. Yes, they are great, but the billions of dollars that single events cause in damage. A preliminary report from Moody's estimates that the losses from Hurricane Helene combined with Milton would exceed $35 billion. So at the end of the day, adapting to climate change, preparing for these weather-related events, yes, that will cost a lot, but not preparing could cost more.
Okay, so there are people who will decide to move because of climate change. But for people who don't want to or can't, how do we adapt our lives and our cultures to weather climate changes?
We should say that climate flight or moving because of climate change, some people will do it because they have to. Some people will be more like these people who move to Asheville, right? Who have the privilege. And I mean, researchers told me that those people will leave behind people who are going to be very vulnerable and need that community support and investment. And it will deepen the inequities, right? If certain people leave, that might take resources from communities that will be clearly at risk. I also think about race here, right? I am in a mixed race family. I don't want my son to grow up in a community that's all white, and yet mostly white communities are often the places that are safer from heat, right? But this idea that there is a paradise you can find, right? That researchers say does not exist. However, it's not about geography, it's about preparation. So there are things that communities can do to prepare, whether it's heat. Heat already is killing people in this country. Trees can provide shade, which are really important in cities. If we're thinking about flooding, we probably wouldn't want to build a bunch of houses at the bottom of a little valley that might flood. When we're thinking about wildfires, we might want to build housing in places that have lots of evacuation routes. My colleague Lauren Sommer did fascinating reporting in Lahaina about these houses that didn't burn when many other houses around them did. And it was because of things like managing the vegetation around the houses and the materials that they used to build the houses that helped them get through the fire. We can be strategic. And of course, there are going to still be hurricanes that no matter how well you prepare your house is not going to survive it. There are going to be fires that certain houses won't get through, but it's about minimizing the risk, right?
What about you, Chloe? How do you think about adapting the culture to climate change?
Yeah. I mean, people are constantly problem solving. When I did reporting on Lahaina, one of the most touching stories I heard was somebody who was running a hula festival there, and that festival had taken place for a long time in front of a huge banyan tree in the middle of town. And that tree was very much a focal point for society, and it had been badly burned. But in order to still have their hula festival, they did it online. They did it on Facebook. They danced somewhere else. So it was very sad in a way that there was a dislocation from this traditional place where they'd done it. But they did still carry on.
Yeah, in the face of climate change, people do have agency. We can make decisions to get to know our neighbors, for example. I mean, that's a climate solution. Your neighbors might be the ones who might have air conditioning if you don't have it and there's a big heat wave. I mean, there are so many things that an individual can do to address global warming. For example, voting is a big one in Brazil. When Brazilians re-elected Lula da Silva, he started addressing deforestation in a big way, right? Which has a big impact on planet heating emissions. So what we do at the voting box matters. Yeah, we have a lot of agency here, and it's really important to not be complacent.
Well, Julia, Chloe, I have learned so much here. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
That's a real pleasure. Thanks.
That was NPR culture correspondent Chloe Veltman and climate solutions reporter Julia Simon. We'll be right back with a little game I like to call, But Did You Know? Stick around. All right. I'm Brittany Luce, here with co-host of NPR's Code Switch, my friend, B.A. Parker. Hi, Parker.
Hi, Brittany.
And in the other chair, we have Corey Antonio Rose, one of our wonderful producers on this very show. Hey, Corey Antonio.
And not to forget reigning champ.
Now, I'll say, though, as is Parker.
Oh, how about that now?
Was this like a tournament of champions?
I mean, I've won twice. I'm 2 for 2.
That's okay, because after today, we both gonna be 2 for 2.
Ooh. Well, today we're going to play a little game I like to call, and I think y'all like to call too. But did you know? So you both played before, but here's a little refresher on how it works. I'm going to share a story that's been making headlines this week, and as I give you some background on the story, I'll also ask you trivia related to it. But don't worry, this is all multiple choice, so the right answer is in there somewhere. First one to blurt out the right answer gets a point. Person with the most points wins, and their prize is bragging rights. It seems like y'all are both bragging already, so I don't know about that.
Oh, no. We cannot rest on our laurels.
But are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'm going to walk you through a story that The Cut published earlier this week. It's about the creator of quote unquote angel numbers. And her name is Doreen Virtue. She basically now, though, says that angel numbers are fake.
No kidding.
Okay, so we got a skeptic on the line. Okay, all right. Do you all know what angel numbers are?
Yeah, 444, 222, 333.
You mean like when you look at the microwave and it's like 444, grateful?
You all are correct. They're numbers that you see in everyday life that supposedly contain hidden messages from the universe. But they're usually repeating numbers, as you pointed out, Corey Antonio, like 1111. But where did the idea of angel numbers come from? In this story, in The Cut, Doreen Virtue says she came up with angel numbers in 2004. She was in her bathroom and got a, quote, download from the heavens. She says that angels were sending down numbers as patterns to communicate with her. She wrote a book. The numbers got very popular. But now Doreen is saying that it's kind of perfect that she came up with this idea in the bathroom because, quote, this stuff should be thrown down the toilet. However, it's out of her hands now, and angel numbers are kind of everywhere from TikTok to celebrity fashion, which leads me to my first question. Which celebrity sometimes wears a necklace with the angel number 222 on it? Is it A, Gwyneth Paltrow, B, Kylie Jenner, or C, Demi Lovato?
C, Demi Lovato.
I'm going with Demi Lovato because she's the one that had the alien show.
The answer is actually B, Kylie Jenner. You were both wrong. I'm so sorry. I have to say, I mean, Demi Lovato is a great red herring. She absolutely seems like somebody who would do that.
No shade to Demi Lovato.
No shade. And
They
no,
just give me mystical, magical vibes.
Yes. So according to Cosmo, the number 222 stands for balance, love, and harmony, which, I mean, who doesn't love those? And Kylie Jenner wore that necklace to give birth to her son, who happened to be born on February 2nd, 2022, which is kind of cute, actually.
Wait.
That is kind of...
That's very cute, actually. Have either of you ever been superstitious about numbers?
I used to like things in threes when I was younger.
Anytime I see my birthday out in the world, so like 616 for June 16th, I'm like, oh my God.
Corey Antonio, it sounds like 616 is your angel number.
Well, anytime I see 616, I'm like, let's go. It's me.
Oh my God. All right, question number 2. While angel numbers are the invention of Doreen Virtue, people have seen mystical significance in numbers for a long time. Which ancient thinker led a religious numbers cult? Was it A, Archimedes, B, Pythagoras, or C, Euclid?
Oh, gotta be B, Pythagoras with his little theorem.
Euclid alone looked on Beauty Bear. Let all who pray to beauty hold their peace. I go with Euclid.
I'm glad you recited that poem, but that was wrong. But Corey Antonio, you were right. It absolutely was B, Pythagoras. His religious cult believed that numbers had powers. God was the greatest mathematician, and their motto was, quote, all is number. It's also said that they didn't eat beans because Pythagoras thought beans had souls. Do y'all think beans have souls?
They could.
I think they're low vibrational.
No, beans have too much fiber to be low vibrational.
I don't need
Parker,
beans. I don't need beans. Low vibrational.
I don't eat beans either.
Y'all have all this focus on numbers. Are you hitting that 30, the 30 grams of fiber that you're supposed to get every day as an adult?
Maybe.
You think I'm counting fiber?
Oh my gosh. Y'all don't eat beans. You're not getting fiber.
I eat oatmeal every morning. That's my fiber.
Focus on the wrong numbers.
What's the next
Okay,
question?
Actually, to recap the score. Okay. Corey Antonio, you are at 1 point. Parker, you are at 0 points. The same amount of beans you probably ate today.
You know what?
Without further ado, the final question.
All right.
Question number 3. So, Doreen Virtue's book about angel numbers did so well. She published more than 50 books and tarot card sets. But she's since left New Age circles and denounced numerology. These days, though, she's still an influencer. But for which spirituality? A, Buddhism, B, Evangelical Christianity, or C, Baha'i?
The evangelical Christianity.
I'm going to go against the grain. I'm going to go with C. Bye.
Well, next time you might want to go with the grain. Unfortunately, Corey Antonio's prophecy came true. The answer is B, Evangelical Christianity. Corey Antonio, are there any 616s in the studio with you? Because
There's a 159 on the clock. I'll take that.
Well, the answer is B, Evangelical Christianity. Doreen Virtue says she heard a preacher on the radio one day talking about false teachers and felt like he was describing her. She now makes videos trying to warn people about angel numbers, even as some of her former students are making videos with the unhinged allegations that she converted because she's been possessed by a demon. Oh, no. Wild stuff. I know. I appreciate this gameplay. I appreciate both of your effort. That's it for But Did You Know for this week. Congratulations to Corey Antonio on yet another win. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
That was co-host of NPR's Code Switch, my friend B.A. Parker, and Corey Antonio Rose, my wonderful producer on this show. I'm going to take a quick break, and when I get back, how waiters and maids in horror films are terrifying audiences and angering critics. Stick around.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Saatva, maker of quality, handcrafted mattresses. Founder and CEO Ron Rutson shares one of their core values.
At Saatva, we believe sleep does unlock a superpower. When you wake up and you're totally refreshed, you go after things more. And it all starts with being on the right mattress. And that's what Saatva has been inspired by from the day that we started.
To learn more, go to SAATVA.com/NPR. This message comes from our sponsor, Grainger. This is the story of the one. As a maintenance engineer, he hears things differently. To the untrained ear, everything on his shop floor might sound fine, but he can hear gears grinding or a belt slipping. So he steps in to fix the problem at hand before it gets out of hand. And he knows Grainger's got the right product he needs to get the job done, which is music to his ears. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Montblanc, the iconic Meisterstück, or masterpiece writing instrument celebrated for over 100 years, now inspires a sophisticated range of leather goods. True to its name, the leather collection combines excellent craftsmanship and a touch of luxury. Discover the collection at Montblanc.com.
And now, it's time for the second installment of the Trilogy of Terror. I love spooky season, and I am obsessed with scary movies. Can't get enough of them. Just this week, I've already watched 4 of them. And for the Trilogy of Terror, I'm digging deep into this genre that I love and breaking down some horror tropes. Last week, I talked about the devil, a hands-down evil guy. But this next one is a bit of a departure. The service worker. You might be scratching your head saying, wait, the waitstaff? Yes, I'm talking about servers, bartenders, cleaners, butlers, you name it. People with regular jobs. But in these regular people, directors see opportunity for a scare. Just look at the creepy cleaning ladies of Blink Twice or Get Out.
Allow me to explain. I can assure you there was no funny business.
Or the motel manager in Vacancy.
Give you two the honeymoon suite for $5 extra. It's got a few perks the others don't.
Or all the cooks and waitstaff in the menu who are basically trying to destroy their patrons. When this trope is used well, the director can serve us up a real meal. See what I did there? That's because these characters can do more than fetch tea and hide the murder weapon. They can reveal the underbelly of the upper crust and get us to think deeper about who our society likes to render invisible. But not all these characters are created equal, and some of them play into ugly stereotypes about working class people. To get further acquainted with the service worker trope in horror, I'm talking to Bowdoin College English professor Aviva Briefel and Slate writer Joshua Rivera about why horror can't stop ringing the servant bell. Aviva, Joshua, welcome to It's Been a Minute.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
The conversation we're going to have today, it's about service work and service workers. Joshua, you recently published an essay laying out how tired you are of bad service worker tropes in horror films. Tell me about the film that set you off.
Oh, man. So this would be Blink Twice, the recent Zoe Kravitz thriller starring Channing Tatum.
Something horrible is about to happen.
Okay, so for listeners who haven't seen it, it's about two friends who are invited for a getaway on a billionaire's private island. And it's a thriller, so obviously the billionaire wants to do more than just party with them on his lavish estate. And of course, things go south. And as a billionaire, he's got a lot of staff around.
Yeah, it really got to me because there was this whole running thread where the help is constantly looking real spooky and eerie and something is going on there. And they just never really get to be people at all. They're definitely othered. They barely speak English. Almost none of them are white, right? Mm-hmm. It's very much a movie about, agency and who has power. When a movie's about that, I tend to notice who doesn't have power and whether or not the narrative cares about that.
Yeah, I had a similar experience seeing Blink Twice when I saw how differently the waitstaff, as you mentioned, was depicted from the rest of the characters. They had a limited range of expression, like almost seeming like robotic or hypnotized in a way that the film never really explains. And even though they didn't speak English, like the other main characters in the film, their sentences in Spanish were not lengthy. Like they didn't talk the way that people who normally express themselves with language speak. I mean, it felt to me the entirety of watching the film that the fate of the waitstaff was an afterthought. And it kind of felt like the film didn't think the audience would care if these characters survived or not.
I mean, this is a typical thing, I think, with racially marked characters, specifically service workers in horror film, where they're there to provide information or some kind of plot device that will help move the narrative forward, but they themselves don't matter. And you're absolutely right that they're just completely in the background. And that was also very troubling to me, right? Because they're witnessing this horrible stuff and you don't really know how much is registering for them. I can also think about The Menu, right? Where there is a real marginalization of service workers. They're there as kind of background or again, as plot points and to move the plot forward.
Okay, and without spoiling it, The Menu, it's basically a satire of high-end food culture where the elite diners are at the mercy of this star chef with dark ambitions.
Plating in 5.
Yes, chef!
I love you all.
We love you too, chef!
The star chef, played by Ralph Fiennes, is a very driven character who has all kinds of fun scenes, but the rest of his staff, a little less so.
Yes, chef!
Service worker characters have been in horror movies basically as long as horror movies have existed. I mean, in the original Dracula, he had the servant Renfield. Aviva, you can trace the service worker trope all the way back to Gothic literature. How did the service worker operate in those stories?
Yeah. So if you look at 19th century Gothic literature, like everything from Jane Eyre to Victorian ghost stories, the servant is important because the servant is in a marginal position, but also has access to information that no one else does. The servant can sneak around and listen to things and have information and know who's, imprisoned in the house in the case of Jane Eyre and can have a critical perspective on what's happening. And so ghost stories also in the 19th century, it's the servant who's going to witness things that the owners of the house, the people who are in charge in a social way, either want to repress and not think about or ignore. So servants as observers has been a very important trope since the beginning of the Gothic.
I mean, there's a lot of built-in tension in there because if you're in a service position, if you make the wrong move, it could cost you your job or your life. And yet, those in power might be afraid of you because of the intimate knowledge you have of them. And maybe because they know that in your role in the house, you might know how to operate in their world better than they would know how to operate in yours. So for the rich person, their security kind of depends on their servants staying in their roles.
Yeah, it's a fascinating power dynamic, right? It's very contingent on the social order staying exactly where it is, right? And if they had the agency or the social clout to actually use the information that they have, that'd be trouble. But they are allowed proximity to wealth and comfort. And they're sort of like expected to not have memories, right? Or
not have opinions, not have desires.
Yeah.
But, moving forward in time from Gothic literature and the films that sort of depict that era, there's how service workers in scary movies were depicted in early cinema. What were the directors of the 30s and 40s trying to say through these characters? And if you could give us some examples.
One of the earliest instances that I can think about are the zombie films from 30s and 40s. So zombies as monsters, as creatures, come from an Afro-Caribbean tradition, right? But were seized in very racialized ways by early 20th century filmmakers to kind of give this sense of like race as exotic and scary, right? So I'm thinking of the film White Zombie from the early 30s.
Zombie? Yes. They are my servant.
So the zombie master is controlling these characters. Sometimes, white woman, God forbid, is also, subject to all of these things.
Wow.
But I know. Also, there are these very, for the time, ominous Black characters who are zombified lurking in the background. And so it's kind of putting the zombie back in a place of servitude, which is really like one of the things that's disturbing about these early films.
Which could also say something about how servants are valued.
And then I'm also thinking about in the 30s and 40s, I mean, you mentioned Dracula, the mad scientist, also the Frankenstein, the servant who's often marked as being disabled in some way, right? Who's also marginalized and who's the kind of Igor or whatever figure who's like, there to assist with the experiments.
Right. Just servants of evil, basically. I want to jump forward in time a bit and turn to an iconic horror movie, Psycho, which is credited as the first modern slasher film. The killer is basically a motel worker. How did you see that movie play with power dynamics and the service worker trope?
Well, it's so interesting because with Psycho, right, so Norman Bates and his mother are, technically owners, right? They're the owners of this motel and this old kind of Victorian-looking mansion, but their authority has been displaced by the building of a highway so that no one's going to their motels. And so Norman Bates says, all I do all the time is change sheets for people who aren't there, right? And one of the things that's so striking about that film is how much the film actually pays attention to the labor that he does in the motel. It's not a glamorous job.
Well, I run the office, tend the cabins and grounds, and do little errands for my mother.
He's like mopping the floor. He's changing the bed. There's a lot in that film, obviously, that's about like a kind of way in which work itself becomes gothic or scary because there's a very prolonged scene where, Marion Crane is murdered in the famous shower scene. And then he spends like a good few minutes, which we have to watch, mopping the floor. We're not used to seeing somebody do like domestic labor for such prolonged amounts of time, especially not in a horror film that's like, something horrible has just happened. And I think that's significant. It's a way for the film to tell us like there are people in this country who have been displaced, but those people might strike back. And a little bit later, we see this in a film like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right?
My family's always been in me.
Where there's a family who was in charge of a slaughterhouse operation.
Hey man, did you go in that slaughter room or whatever they call it? The place where they shoot the cattle in the head with that big air gun thing.
Oh, that gun's no good. No way. With a sledge.
But we're displaced by a mechanized system of slaughterhouse work.
New way people put out of jobs.
And so they themselves then, their only means of survival is cannibalism, murder, etc. And so that too is a kind of class revolt.
I appreciate what you say about displacement here, because part of what I sort of like started thinking about when we were talking about having this conversation was space and entitlement to it, right? A lot of these films start, with the ominous gas station attendant, right? As people with the privilege to go where they wish, or who think they have the privilege to go where they wish, arrive somewhere where they don't understand the dynamics at play, right? And they suffer for it.
A very notable example of this is Cabin in the Woods, which is a horror movie that also kind of like makes fun of the whole genre. And in it, there's this gas station attendant who basically serves as like a harbinger of doom, who tells this, car full of teens that they shouldn't go somewhere. And by ignoring him, they basically launch, the terrors that they experience in this movie.
I think we got enough gas. You got enough to get you there. Getting back. That's your concern.
I mean, as we've been discussing, service workers can be used to demonstrate, the evil of the upper class. But as we are bringing it to today, is there a movie or director that you think really changed the game in terms of how service workers are portrayed in horror films?
Maybe an obvious example is Jordan Peele's Get Out.
Because you never take my advice.
Like what?
Like, don't go to a white girl parent's house.
His whole film, Get Out, is about marginalization and about what it means to actually take over somebody's body and use that body for your own purposes, and Black bodies in particular. And he does that incredibly well with the servants in the film, who, especially I'm thinking about the housekeeper Georgina, right, who has been sent to the sunken place.
Which basically means she's been possessed by someone else and her soul is stuck in this in-between world. But she's still kind of there.
And there's that amazing scene, right, when she's trying to kind of communicate something to Chris.
No.
And so there's a there was a story there's an identity there that's been taken away.
Yeah, I think what Jordan Peele does better than most is his films have characters that are navigating different socioeconomic territory. Chris in Get Out is in this very uncomfortable upper class white suburb for much of this film. And so he's a little uncomfortable with like the service workers there. He is relieved to see Lakeith Stanfield's character.
Like he identifies with them, which is also different. In Blink Twice, the protagonist, Frida, is a cocktail waitress that does not identify with the people who are serving her cocktails as soon as she gets on that island. But as you mentioned in Get Out, Chris, the main character, identifies with the other Black people that he sees because he sees them as other Black people in the space.
Absolutely.
And he feels a kinship as opposed to feeling like they have no relationship whatsoever.
Yeah, and that's vital to making the social structure of a film work, right? Or make sense. It's also just real. I don't know. I've done service work, right? And I feel a little weird at a catered party where I want to say thank you. And also you need any help back there? Let me.
Yeah, because you've been on both sides of the interaction, but there are also possibly many people who are around you who have only been on one side of the interaction before.
Yeah, there is a profound discomfort, an unnatural feeling to being in a position where you can navigate both sides. You feel like you're getting away with something. And I don't know, I think that's a potent space for horror. And I think that's what the more effective socially minded horror films really get at.
I don't know. I feel like I kind of feel like they're using all these service workers as kind of NPCs. They're just like these kind of non-speaking, non-thinking characters that just can be extinguished in service of a story that doesn't always fully eke out. I don't know. I wonder, Joshua, I'd love to hear from you on this first. Where do these movies go wrong and how could they be better?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's easy to think that maybe I'm advocating for giving every character a name or a backstory, and that's not feasible.
I don't want to. I think that's how we got Megalopolis. I don't know.
Yeah, frankly, I don't want to know everybody. I think where we tend to go wrong here is we become so enamored with who our target is, right? A lot of these modern films like Ready or Not, right? The Menu, Blink Twice, right? They're about the catharsis of taking someone down a peg, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very much these are films that are coming after COVID, right? Coming after massive like social upheaval, right? And just about every aspect of American life. And we have a lot of people that'll be pissed off at, right? And I think it's important that to note that, you know, rich people make Hollywood movies, you know. So what do you call it? And the funny thing about American life is that there's always a richer guy. There's always a bigger target. And you don't necessarily have to think about your own culpability. That's harder to do, and it's also scarier. So, like, I think it would make for, you know, better films, better horror.
There's also a certain kind of voyeuristic pleasure in like, ooh, the beauty of that and the kind of class aspiration in a way that most people watching these films are not like multimillionaires. And there's something about that that's like Hollywood has always done. Like, look at how the rich are living, and like even during the Depression or during. And so there's that. It's almost like these films, I think, get lost in that fantasy. And so I think that the voyeurism gets a little bit in the way, that we're kind of like, wow, there's such a pleasure in watching this. But we're not going to take that other step to be like, well, how are these servants living in this horrific situation?
The films that we watch reflect the world that we live in. And when we see the service worker trope trotted out again and again without an attempt at thought or commentary, right? I wonder what possible effects does that lead to out in the world?
Repetition of this idea that there are people beneath our notice, you know, that there are people who just don't matter or don't matter in certain contexts.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think if we look at them, again, that's so embedded in the narrative structure of some of these films like Blink Twice or The Menu. It's like, you don't have to notice them because they're not important to the narrative except for how they reflect on these main characters. So you just have to get the bare minimum idea that they're there to help the main character, whether or not they're aware of it.
Well, oh my gosh, Joshua, Aviva, I have really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And so nice to meet you both.
That was Bowdoin College English professor Aviva Briefel and Slate writer Joshua Rivera. And make sure you tap back into the podcast on Tuesday, because we have a guest that we just can't get out of our heads. That's right, Kylie Minogue. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Barton Girdwood,
Alexis Williams,
Liam McBain,
Corey Antonio Rose.
This episode was edited by
Jessica Placzek.
Engineering support came from
Carly Strange,
Ted Mebane.
Our executive producer is
Jasmine Romero.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
Support for NPR and the following message come from IXL Learning. IXL Learning uses advanced algorithms to give the right help to each kid, no matter the age or personality. Get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when you sign up today at IXL.com/NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Rosetta Stone, an expert in language learning for 30 years. Right now, NPR listeners can get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership to 25 different languages for 50% off. Learn more at rosettastone.com/NPR. This message comes from NPR sponsor Vuori, a new perspective on performance apparel. Check out the latest Dream Knit collection by visiting vuori.com/NPR for 20% off your first purchase. Exclusions apply. Visit the website for full terms and conditions.